she slapped and divorced his wife. Their servant stood up and said, "I love her." No one knew he was a secret billionaire. He loved her deeply. At first he sent her secret messages because her stepmother had sold her for money. He knew she was in pain, so he joined their house as a servant, just to protect her. A truly great love story. Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. Before we begin, allow me to place a prayer like a gentle hand over your heart. May the light of heaven kiss your soul today. May peace rise within you like a quiet morning river. May every weight you carry become lighter, and every shadow in your heart be chased away by love. I pray that unexpected kindness finds you, that joy knocks on your door when you least expect it, and that your soul rests in the truth, that you are worthy, you are deeply seen, and you are endlessly loved. No matter what you're walking through, may grace walk beside you. Now, my beautiful family, today's story is close to my heart. James will speak it aloud, but I wrote every word, with love, with care, and with all the emotion you've come to know from me. But before we begin, may I ask you something gently? Are you getting bored by my introductions? I know I speak from the heart. I just hope my words still reach yours. And just to say this with love, in my stories, when I describe someone, it's never to divide. It's always to honor. My stories celebrate beauty in all its forms, always through a lens of love. And now, if you feel led, say a prayer for me today. Just one simple prayer from your heart. That's all I ask. And please, family, watch the full story. Don't leave halfway. Every second carries emotion, healing, and purpose, and I want to share all of it with you. Like the video, drop a comment, even just a heart. Let me feel that you're still here. Now take a breath. Let the world slow down for a moment. And let James begin the story. A story not just written, but lived from my heart to yours.
"You're nothing but a worthless investment that's never paid dividends," Russell Patterson snarled, as he grabbed Kathy's wrist so tightly she could feel the bones grinding together beneath his manicured fingers. "My mother was right. I should have married Evangeline Thorne instead of wasting 3 years on a pathetic charity case like you." Kathy Lilly stood frozen in the marble foyer of the Patterson mansion, her dark skin bearing the invisible weight of countless such moments. The emerald silk gown Russell had demanded she wear for tonight's charity gala hung perfectly on her graceful frame, but she felt like a decorated prisoner walking to her execution. The 25-year-old woman had learned long ago that beauty meant nothing when your soul was slowly dying inside a golden cage. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. "Beauty without freedom is just another kind of prison, baby girl." "Please, Russell," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's merciless ticking. "I just asked if we could arrive a few minutes late, so I could finish setting up the silent auction items you requested." "Did I ask for your opinion?" His cold blue eyes flashed with the same cruelty that had become as familiar to her as breathing. Russell Patterson, heir to the Patterson textile fortune, stood 6 feet tall with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of aristocratic features that graced magazine covers. To the outside world, he was Charleston's most eligible bachelor who had graciously married a beautiful black woman, proving his progressive values. He was charming at charity galas, thoughtful in business meetings, and beloved by society matrons who praised his generous spirit. Behind closed doors, he was the architect of her systematic destruction, and only Kathy knew the monster that lived beneath his public facade. You'll learn to move faster, or you'll learn what real consequences feel like. The threat hung in the air like poison as Kathy's stepmother's words echoed in her memory. "Your lucky Russell Patterson wants to marry you, girl. Do you know what I'm getting for this arrangement? Enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Don't you dare mess this up." Cordelia Blackthorne had sold her stepdaughter like livestock when Kathy turned 19, presenting the marriage as a fairy tale opportunity. "A wealthy white man wants to make you his wife," she had said with dollar signs dancing in her eyes. "You'll live in a mansion, wear designer clothes, never want for anything." What Cordelia had failed to mention was that Russell's proposal came with conditions that made Kathy more of an employee than a wife. The massive crystal chandelier above them cast fractured rainbows across the imported Italian marble, each shard of light reminding Kathy of how broken she felt inside. The mansion's opulent grandeur, Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes, oil paintings from renowned artists, furniture that belonged in museums, felt like a beautiful mausoleum where her dreams had come to die. "Fix your face," Russell commanded, checking his Rolex with practiced indifference. "The Weatherbees will be at this gala, and if you embarrass me in front of Charleston's most influential family, you'll regret it for weeks." His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Remember what happened the last time you failed to impress my business associates." Kathy's ribs still ached from that lesson. She had accidentally mentioned her college literature degree during a dinner party, causing Russell's guests to ask why such an educated woman wasn't working. Russell's response had been swift and private, a reminder that her only job was to look beautiful, stay silent, and never outshine him intellectually. The sound of expensive heels clicking across marble announced the arrival of Octavia Pattison, Russell's mother and the unofficial queen of Charleston society. Octavia stood in the doorway like a perfectly preserved viper, her silver hair sculpted into an elaborate chignon, and her pale eyes scanning Kathy with undisguised disdain. "Russell, darling, I hope you've reminded your wife about proper behavior tonight," Octavia said, her voice dripping with cultured venom. "The Ashford family specifically requested that she not discuss politics, current events, or anything requiring actual thought. We can't have a repeat of last month's disaster." Last month's disaster had been Kathy's attempt to contribute to a conversation about education reform. Her thoughtful insights had been met with stunned silence, not because they weren't intelligent, but because Russell's social circle couldn't reconcile her eloquence with their preconceived notions. Russell had spent the entire drive home reminding her that her role was ornamental, not intellectual. "She understands her place," Russell assured his mother while adjusting his platinum cufflinks. "Don't you, Kathy?" "Yes," Kathy whispered, hating how small her voice sounded in the cavernous space. The word tasted like ashes in her mouth, but she had learned that resistance only prolonged the punishment. Darius Pattison emerged from the library, holding a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Russell's older brother possessed the same cruel beauty as his sibling, but where Russell's cruelty was explosive, Darius was calculatingly cold. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly, and his gray eyes held the warmth of winter storm clouds. "Mother, you're being too harsh," Darius said with mock sympathy. "Kathy tries so hard to fit in with civilized society. It's not her fault she was raised in such modest circumstances." The way he said modest made it sound like a disease. Kathy closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the small but happy apartment she had shared with her grandmother before the woman died. Grandmother Lily had filled their humble home with love, books, and dreams of a better future. She had saved every penny to send Kathy to college, believing education was the key to breaking generational cycles. If she could see Kathy now, trapped in luxury but devoid of love, she would weep. "The car is waiting," Russell announced, grabbing his black cashmere coat. "And Kathy, remember that tonight's charity auction is raising money for literacy programs. Try not to let the irony of an uneducated woman supporting education become too obvious." The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. Kathy held a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of South Carolina, graduating magna cum laude, despite working 2 jobs to supplement her scholarship. She had dreamed of becoming a teacher, of inspiring young minds the way her grandmother had inspired her. Instead, she had become a silent decoration in Russell's perfectly orchestrated life. As they walked toward the waiting limousine, Kathy caught a glimpse of herself in the hall mirror. The woman staring back was stunning. High cheekbones, warm brown eyes that once sparkled with intelligence and humor, full lips that used to smile freely. But there was something indefinably broken about her expression, as if her spirit was slowly being erased. The charity gala would be another performance in the theater of her marriage. She would stand by Russell's side, smile when expected, remain silent when dismissed, and endure the pitying looks from other wives who recognized her situation, but were too afraid of Octavia Patterson's social power to intervene. Tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, Kathy would play the role of the grateful wife who had been rescued from poverty by a generous man. She would pretend that the emerald necklace around her throat wasn't a collar, that the designer gown wasn't a costume, and that the mansion wasn't a prison. But deep in her heart, in a place Russell couldn't reach no matter how hard he tried, a small flame of hope still flickered. Somewhere, somehow, there had to be more than this. There had to be someone who would see her as more than an ornament, more than a trophy, more than a mistake to be corrected. As the limousine pulled away from the mansion, Kathy pressed her face against the cool window and whispered to herself the same words she had repeated every day for 3 years. There has to be more than this. She had no idea that tonight someone would finally answer her silent prayer. Chapter 2. The Guardian Angel. Smile wider, you pathetic excuse for a wife, or I'll give you something to really cry about when we get home, Russell hissed into Kathy's ear as they entered the grand ballroom of the Charleston Heritage Hotel, his fingers digging into her elbow with enough force to leave fingerprint bruises beneath the silk of her gloves. The charity gala was in full swing, with Charleston's elite draped in their finest jewels and most expensive facades. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, while a string quartet played softly in the corner, their music barely audible above the symphony of artificial laughter and carefully modulated conversations about stock portfolios and summer homes. Kathy forced her lips into the practiced smile that had become as natural as breathing, even as her soul withered a little more. She had perfected this expression over 3 years of marriage, bright enough to suggest happiness, but not so radiant as to draw attention away from Russell. He required her to be beautiful, but not breathtaking, charming, but not memorable, present, but not truly seen. "There's Senator Whitmore," Russell murmured, his grip tightening possessively. "Remember, if he asks about your background, you're from a modest family who raised you with proper values. No mention of scholarships, student loans, or that pathetic apartment you grew up in." Across the ballroom, John Flanders stood, nursing a glass of champagne he had no intention of drinking, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the woman who had haunted his dreams for 6 months. At 32, John commanded respect in every room he entered, not just because his tech empire was worth billions, but because he possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from building something meaningful from nothing. His black hair was perfectly styled but not overly formal, and his custom-tailored tuxedo fit his tall, athletic frame like it had been crafted by angels. But tonight, none of his accomplishments mattered. Tonight, he was just a man watching the woman he loved being systematically destroyed by a monster in expensive clothes. John had first seen Kathy at the Magnolia Foundation dinner 6 months ago. She had been standing alone on the hotel balcony, her face turned toward the stars with an expression of such profound longing that it had taken his breath away. For just one moment, when she thought no one was watching, her mask had slipped, revealing the brilliant, resilient woman trapped beneath Russell Patterson's suffocating control. That glimpse had changed everything for John. He had spent the following months learning everything about her, not through invasive investigation, but through careful observation and genuine interest. He discovered that she had graduated magna cum laude with a degree in English literature. He learned that she had once written poetry, that she loved Maya Angelou and Emily Dickinson, that she had dreamed of teaching young minds to find their voices through literature. What truly captured his heart wasn't just her beauty, but her resilience. He watched her endure Russell's public humiliations with grace, saw her maintain kindness toward household staff despite her own suffering, observed her reading to children at the hospital charity events when she thought no one was looking. This was a woman of substance, intelligence, and strength, who was being systematically destroyed by someone who couldn't recognize her worth. He also learned that Russell Patterson was slowly murdering her spirit, one cruel word at a time. "Mr. Flanders?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. John turned to find Franklin Weatherby, one of Charleston's most prominent businessmen, approaching with his characteristic politician's smile. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. Usually you avoid these social gatherings like the plague." John forced himself to engage in polite conversation while keeping Kathy in his peripheral vision. "The literacy program is important to me," he replied honestly. "Education can transform lives when given the chance." "Spoken like a true self-made man," Franklin chuckled. "Though I have to say, your absence from Charleston's social scene has been noticed. The mothers with eligible daughters have been quite disappointed." If only they knew, John thought grimly, that his heart belonged entirely to a woman who was being systematically broken just 50 feet away. As if summoned by his thoughts, Russell's voice cut through the elegant chatter like a blade. "Kathy, for Christ's sake, stand up straight. You look like a question mark bent over like that. Do you want people to think I married a woman with no breeding?" John's hands clenched into fists as he watched Kathy immediately straighten her shoulders, her beautiful face carefully blank, despite the humiliation coloring her cheeks. The emerald necklace around her throat, which John recognized as worth more than most people's houses, might as well have been a chain for all the freedom it represented. "I should circulate," John told Franklin, already moving toward the source of his heart's constant ache. He approached the group surrounding Russell Patterson with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Russell, Octavia, and Darius were holding court near the silent auction tables, their conversation a masterclass in veiled insults and social dominance. "Russell," John said smoothly, extending his hand. "John Flanders. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Russell's eyes lit up with the kind of greed that always appeared when he sensed an opportunity for advancement. Everyone in Charleston knew John Flanders by reputation, the tech mogul who had revolutionized data security and made billions in the process. Securing his friendship could open doors that even the Patterson name couldn't budge. "Mr. Flanders, what an honor," Russell gushed, his entire demeanor shifting into charm mode. "Allow me to introduce my family, my mother, Octavia Patterson, my brother Darius, and my wife, Kathy." John's breath caught as Kathy raised her eyes to meet his for the first time. Up close, she was even more stunning than he had imagined. Her warm brown eyes held depths of intelligence and pain that made his chest tighten with protective fury. When she offered her gloved hand, he took it gently, as if it were made of the finest porcelain. "Mrs. Patterson," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that made her eyes widen slightly. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Flanders," she replied in the carefully modulated tone Russell had trained her to use. But John caught the slight tremor in her voice, the way her breath hitched when their skin touched, even through the fabric of her gloves. "Kathy doesn't say much," Russell interjected with a laugh that held no humor. "She's more of a decorative asset than a conversationalist. Beautiful to look at, but not much going on upstairs, if you know what I mean." The insult hit John like a physical blow, and he watched in horror as Kathy's face went carefully blank, her shoulders hunching slightly as if trying to make herself smaller. This was clearly a familiar humiliation, delivered with the casual cruelty of long practice. "Actually," John said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make Russell pause, "I find that the most interesting conversations often come from people who choose their words carefully rather than those who simply enjoy hearing themselves speak." The rebuke was subtle but unmistakable. Octavia's eyes narrowed dangerously, while Darius studied John with newfound interest. Russell's smile became strained, uncertain how to respond to someone who clearly outranked him socially and financially. But it was Kathy's reaction that mattered most to John. Her eyes flew to his face, searching for mockery or pity, but finding only genuine respect and something that looked suspiciously like admiration. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the brilliant woman she had been before Russell began systematically destroying her confidence. "Perhaps you'd honor me with a dance later, Mrs. Patterson," John asked, his tone making it clear that he was asking her directly, not seeking Russell's permission. "Oh, Kathy doesn't dance," Russell said quickly, his hand moving to her waist in a gesture that looked possessive rather than affectionate. "She's rather clumsy, actually, 2 left feet and all that." John's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew from his research that Kathy had been on her high school dance team and had taught ballroom dancing to help pay for college. Russell was systematically stripping away every source of her confidence and joy. "That's a shame," John replied smoothly. "I find that dancing can be quite therapeutic. Sometimes we just need the right partner to help us remember how to move with grace." The words were directed at Kathy, but their meaning was clear to everyone in the group. This wasn't just about dancing, it was about finding someone who would treat her as an equal partner rather than a possession to be controlled. As the evening progressed, John found himself making a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Watching Russell continue to belittle and diminish the woman he loved, seeing the way Kathy grew smaller and more invisible with each casual cruelty, John realized that his billions and his influence meant nothing if he couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. That night, after returning to his penthouse overlooking Charleston Harbor, John sat in his study and made the most important decision of his life. He contacted Franklin Whitfield, a former intelligence operative who now ran a discreet consulting firm specializing in identity creation for witness protection programs and high-profile divorces. "I need a bulletproof identity as a domestic servant," John explained during their clandestine meeting. "Someone who can pass the most rigorous background checks that old money families conduct." Within 2 weeks, Franklin had crafted Jonas Fletcher, a real person with documented employment history at European estates, verifiable references from families who had been compensated handsomely for their discretion, and even doctored photographs showing John with altered facial hair and different styling. The cover included plastic surgery consultation records suggesting he had undergone subtle facial modifications after a car accident, explaining any discrepancies if someone thought he looked familiar. If being a billionaire wasn't enough to reach Kathy, then he would become whatever he needed to be. He would give up his luxury, his status, his entire public identity if necessary, just to be close enough to protect her from the daily cruelties that were slowly killing her spirit. Love, John had learned that night, didn't recognize the boundaries of social class or personal pride. Love meant being willing to become a servant, if that was the only way to save the woman who had become his whole world with just one look. Within a week, Jonas Fletcher would be applying for a position in the Patterson household, armed with nothing but determination and a love so profound it could move mountains, or at least one broken woman's heart. Chapter 3. Silent Messages. If you can't even manage to keep the staff in line, what good are you? Russell's voice cracked like a whip across the breakfast room as he threw his morning newspaper at Kathy's feet, his face twisted with the kind of rage that had become as predictable as sunrise. "The new butler you hired has been rearranging things without permission, and I found a white rose in the hallway that has no business being there." Kathy flinched as the newspaper scattered across the Persian rug, her hands trembling as she bent to gather the pages. 3 weeks had passed since Jonas Fletcher had joined their household staff, and while his presence brought an inexplicable sense of comfort, it also seemed to amplify Russell's cruelty, as if her husband sensed some threat to his absolute control. "I'm sorry, Russell," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's relentless ticking. "I'll speak with him about maintaining proper boundaries." But even as she spoke the words, Kathy's heart rebelled against them. The white roses that had been appearing throughout the house weren't intrusions. They were the first beautiful things she had seen in years that weren't tainted by obligation or manipulation. Each morning she found one perfectly placed where only she would notice, beside her favorite reading chair on the windowsill of the music room where she used to play piano, tucked into the pages of the poetry books she thought no one knew she still treasured. Jonas Fletcher had arrived at the Pattison mansion like an answer to a prayer Kathy hadn't dared voice. Tall and dignified, with kind gray eyes and gentle hands, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to managing the most demanding households. His references were impeccable. He had supposedly served European aristocracy and American old money with equal skill. But there was something different about him that Kathy couldn't quite identify. Where other servants in the Pattison household had learned to become invisible, Jonas seemed to see everything. When Russell screamed at her for serving his coffee at the wrong temperature, Jonas appeared with a perfectly heated replacement before she could apologize. When Octavia criticized her posture during dinner parties, Kathy would later find a book on etiquette with encouraging notes written in elegant handwriting. When Darius made cutting remarks about her education, Jonas would ensure that the latest issues of literary magazines appeared in her private sitting room. Most remarkably, Jonas seemed to anticipate her needs in ways that felt almost magical. On mornings when she woke with tears on her cheeks from dreams of her grandmother, she would find her favorite lavender tea waiting on the breakfast tray, not the harsh Earl Grey that Russell preferred, but the delicate French blend that reminded her of happier times. The tea service would be arranged on delicate Wedgwood china with a small card featuring quotes from Maya Angelou. "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." "I don't want to hear your excuses," Russell continued, his voice rising to the pitch that made the crystal in the dining room rattle. "That butler is overstepping his bounds, and I'm beginning to think you hired him because you have some ridiculous schoolgirl crush. Is that it, Kathy? Are you so desperate for attention that you're fantasizing about the help?" The accusation hit her like a physical blow, not because it was true in the way Russell imagined, but because it touched something dangerously close to reality. Jonas Fletcher made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death. When he served her meals, his movements were graceful and respectful. When he opened doors for her, he met her eyes with genuine kindness, rather than the calculating assessment she was accustomed to receiving from men. "That's not... I would never," Kathy stammered, her cheeks burning with shame and confusion. "Wouldn't you?" Russell's smile was cruel and knowing. "I've seen how you light up when he enters the room. Do you think I'm blind to your pathetic attempts at flirtation? The way you thank him too often, the way you smile when he hands you things?" Kathy's heart pounded with terror because Russell's observations weren't entirely wrong. She did find herself looking forward to Jonas's quiet presence, did feel a flutter of something that might have been hope when he appeared during Russell's worst moments. But it wasn't romantic fantasy that drew her to him. It was the simple recognition of her humanity that he offered without expecting anything in return. "Perhaps I should dismiss him," Russell mused, watching her face carefully for reactions. "Send him packing with no references. See how much you miss your knight in shining armor then." "Please," the word escaped before Kathy could stop it, her desperation making her voice crack. He's the best butler we've ever had. The house runs smoothly, your schedule is perfectly managed, and even your mother has complimented his service. Russell's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at her obvious distress. Ah, so you do care about him. How touching. Very well, he can stay, but I'll be watching both of you very carefully, and if I catch even a hint of impropriety, he'll be gone, and you'll learn what real consequences feel like. Later that afternoon, as Kathy retreated to the conservatory to tend the orchids that were one of her few remaining joys, she found Jonas carefully adjusting the temperature controls with the precision of someone who understood the delicate balance required for the exotic flowers to thrive. "Mrs. Patterson," he said softly, turning toward her with that same respectful attention that never failed to surprise her, "I was ensuring your orchids have optimal growing conditions. The Phalaenopsis seem to be struggling with the humidity levels." "You know about orchids?" she asked, unable to hide her amazement. Most of the household staff avoided the conservatory, considering it another of her frivolous pursuits. "My grandmother grew them," Jonas replied, his voice carrying a warmth that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "She taught me that the most beautiful things in life require patience, consistency, and gentle care. They can't be forced to bloom through harsh words or rough treatment." The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. Kathy found herself studying his profile as he checked the soil moisture with practiced hands. There was something almost familiar about the way he moved, as if they had met before in another life where kindness wasn't a luxury she couldn't afford. "Jonas," she said hesitantly, then stopped, unsure how to voice the questions that had been building in her heart for weeks. "Yes, ma'am." His tone was professionally respectful, but she caught something warmer underneath. "The roses, the tea, the way the house temperature is always perfect now, the music in the hallways when I'm sad. Why are you doing these things? It's beyond what any employer would expect." For a moment his careful composure slipped, and she caught a glimpse of something profound in his gray eyes. Pain, longing, and a depth of feeling that took her breath away. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible above the gentle hum of the conservatory's ventilation system. "Because everyone deserves to be surrounded by beauty, Mrs. Patterson. Everyone deserves to feel valued and seen. You bring light into this house simply by existing in it, and that light should be celebrated, not diminished." Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. No one had spoken to her with such gentle reverence in years. The words wrapped around her wounded heart like a healing balm, making her remember what it felt like to be treated as a human being rather than a possession. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you risk your position for someone like me?" Jonas stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his presence. "Because you're not someone like anyone, Mrs. Patterson. You're extraordinary, and anyone with eyes to see would consider it an honor to ensure your happiness." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them spring apart, but not before Kathy saw something in Jonas's expression that made her heart race with dangerous possibilities. As Russell's voice echoed through the house demanding her presence, Jonas straightened his shoulders and assumed his professional demeanor. "I should return to my duties," he said formally, but as he passed her, he whispered so softly she almost missed it. "You deserve so much more than this. You're precious beyond measure." That night, as Kathy lay in her separate bedroom listening to Russell's drunken snoring through the adjoining wall, she clutched the Maya Angelou quote Jonas had left on her nightstand. "If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude." For the first time in 3 years, Kathy began to wonder if change might actually be possible. Jonas Fletcher had awakened something in her that Russell's cruelty couldn't quite destroy, the faint but growing belief that she might still be worth saving. She fell asleep holding the white rose he had left beside her bedside lamp, its delicate fragrance promising that somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching over her with a love she couldn't yet comprehend, but desperately needed to believe existed. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. You cursed witch. Everything started falling apart the day I married you. Russell's fist slammed into the mahogany dining table with such force that the crystal wine glasses jumped, sending crimson liquid splashing across the white linen tablecloth like drops of blood. My business is ruined, my reputation is destroyed, and it's all because I was stupid enough to tie myself to a worthless piece of trash like you. The federal fraud investigation had been building for months, but this morning's headlines in the Charleston Business Journal had finally exposed the extent of Russell Patterson's financial crimes. Years of embezzlement, tax evasion, and investor fraud were now public knowledge, and the FBI had frozen the company's assets pending a full audit. The Patterson textile empire that had stood for 4 generations was crumbling, and Russell needed someone to blame for his own greed and stupidity. Kathy stood frozen beside the sideboard where she had been arranging fresh flowers for tonight's dinner party, a gathering of potential investors that Russell desperately hoped might save his sinking empire. Her hands trembled as she held the crystal vase, every instinct screaming at her to run, while his rage was still contained to words rather than fists. "I'm sorry this is happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm of his fury. "Maybe we should cancel tonight's dinner." "Cancel?" Russell's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here? Senator Whitmore is coming tonight, along with the Ashford family and Franklin Weatherby. These people could save everything, and you want me to cancel because you're too weak to handle a little pressure." The irony wasn't lost on Kathy that Russell's salvation depended on the same social connections he had spent years preventing her from cultivating. She had watched him systematically isolate her from potential friendships, dismiss her insights during conversations, and reduce her to a silent ornament at gatherings, where her intelligence might have actually impressed the very people he now needed to charm. Octavia Patterson swept into the dining room like an avenging angel, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the family crisis, and her cold blue eyes blazing with righteous indignation. Behind her followed Darius, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain, his tie slightly askew, his eyes rimmed with red from too little sleep and too much whiskey. "Russell, I've just spoken with our attorneys," Octavia announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "The situation is worse than we thought. The investigation has expanded to include money laundering charges, and they're talking about RICO violations." Darius nodded grimly, loosening his tie with the gesture of a man watching his world collapse. "Our legal team says we need to prepare for the possibility of criminal charges, asset forfeiture, prison time, the whole nightmare scenario. This is all your fault." Russell whirled on Kathy with such sudden violence that she stepped backward, her hip hitting the sideboard hard enough to bruise. "I should have listened to Mother from the beginning. I should have married Evangeline Thorne and stayed within our own social circle instead of trying to be progressive by marrying some charity case." "Russell, please," Kathy began, but his hand struck her cheek with a sound like a gunshot, sending her stumbling against the wall. "Don't you dare speak," he roared, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. "You've brought nothing but bad luck to this family from the day you walked through our door. My business was thriving before I married you. My reputation was spotless. My future was secure." The accusation was as absurd as it was cruel. Kathy had never been involved in Russell's business dealings beyond playing the dutiful wife at company functions. She had no access to his accounts, no knowledge of his illegal activities, no involvement in the decisions that had led to his downfall. But Russell needed someone to blame, and she was the most convenient target. "Perhaps," Octavia said coldly, her eyes fixed on Kathy with undisguised hatred, "it's time to consider cutting our losses." A divorce might actually help your image, Russell. Show the public that you're willing to make hard choices to distance yourself from unsavory associations. The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. Kathy felt the blood drain from her face as she realized that Octavia wasn't just talking about ending a marriage, she was talking about destroying Kathy's entire life. Without Russell's financial support, she would have nothing. No money, no home, no family to turn to. Cordelia Blackthorne had made it clear years ago that Kathy was dead to her if the marriage failed. That's actually not a terrible idea, Darius mused, studying Kathy with the dispassionate calculation of someone evaluating livestock. Evangeline Thorne has been remarkably supportive during this crisis. Her family has connections that could prove invaluable, and a marriage alliance might demonstrate our commitment to rebuilding respectability. Evangeline, Russell repeated slowly, his eyes taking on the kind of calculating gleam that appeared whenever he sensed an opportunity for advancement. She's been very attentive lately, very understanding about my situation. Kathy's heart shattered as she realized they were discussing her replacement with the casual indifference of people rearranging furniture. 3 years of her life, 3 years of enduring Russell's cruelty and his family's disdain, and they were prepared to discard her like yesterday's newspaper. The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Jonas Fletcher, carrying a silver tray with coffee service for the family meeting. But as soon as he entered the room and saw Kathy's tear-stained face and the red handprint on her cheek, his entire body went rigid with barely controlled fury. "Sir," Jonas said, his voice carefully neutral despite the storm building in his gray eyes, "shall I postpone the evening's dinner service given the family's current discussion?" "Absolutely not," Russell snapped, seemingly oblivious to the danger radiating from the man he thought was merely a servant. "Tonight's dinner could save everything, and I won't let this useless woman ruin it for me." "Of course, sir," Jonas replied, but his eyes never left Kathy's bruised face. "Perhaps Mrs. Pattison would benefit from some ice for her cheek. I could prepare a compress." "She'll be fine," Russell interrupted harshly. "A little reminder of her place might actually improve her behavior tonight." The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock sharp, their expensive cars pulling up to the mansion's circular drive, while Kathy stood in the receiving line with makeup carefully applied to hide the worst of the bruising. Senator Whitmore and his wife, the Ashford family, Franklin Weatherby, and several other influential figures gathered in the formal dining room, their conversations carefully avoiding any mention of the scandal that dominated Charleston's gossip circles. Kathy moved through the evening like a ghost, serving wine, ensuring plates were cleared efficiently, and maintaining the perfect smile that had become as natural as breathing. But underneath her composed exterior, something fundamental was breaking apart, like a dam finally succumbing to years of pressure. The final crack came during the main course, as Russell was explaining his restructuring plans to Senator Whitmore. Kathy was refilling wine glasses when her trembling hands betrayed her, sending Bordeaux streaming across the contract documents Russell had laid out for the senator's review. The silence that followed was deafening. Every face at the table turned toward Kathy with expressions ranging from embarrassment to horror, while Russell's face cycled through several shades of purple before settling on a white-hot rage that he barely contained beneath his public mask. "How clumsy of me," Russell said with a strained laugh, his voice carefully modulated for their guests, even as his eyes promised retribution. "Darling, perhaps you should retire for the evening. You seem unwell." The dismissal was delivered with such false concern that their guests murmured sympathetic agreement, but Kathy could see the violence barely leashed behind Russell's society smile. She knew that once their guests departed, she would pay dearly for this humiliation. "Actually," Russell continued, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel, "this evening has made something very clear to me. I believe it's time for some significant changes in our domestic arrangements. After the guests had departed in uncomfortable silence, Russell's carefully maintained facade exploded into the fury she had expected. "You worthless, clumsy piece of garbage," he roared, his fist connecting with her face in the privacy of their home. "I want a divorce. I refuse to be dragged down by this pathetic excuse for a woman any longer." The words echoed in the sudden silence like bullets finding their target. Kathy looked around the table at faces that carefully avoided meeting her eyes. These people who had accepted her hospitality for 3 years were now witnesses to her public humiliation and destruction. But it was the sight of Jonas Fletcher standing in the doorway, his hands clenched into fists and his entire body shaking with rage, that finally gave her the strength to move. Without a word, she walked out of the dining room, climbed the stairs to her bedroom, and began packing the few possessions that truly belonged to her. An hour later, she walked out of the Patterson mansion, carrying only a small suitcase and her grandmother's worn copy of Maya Angelou poems. She had no money, no car, no place to go, but for the first time in 3 years, she was free. Behind her, Jonas Fletcher watched from an upstairs window as the woman he loved disappeared into the Charleston night and began planning the complete destruction of Russell Patterson's remaining world. Chapter 5. Unexpected Refuge. Bed assignments are first come, first served, and if you can't handle sleeping on a cot with a bunch of other desperate women, there's always the street. The intake coordinator at Safe Harbor Women's Shelter said, with the weary indifference of someone who had seen too many broken women pass through her doors to maintain much compassion. "Lights out at 10, breakfast at 6, and if you're not clean and sober, you're gone." Kathy clutched her small suitcase tighter as she followed the coordinator down a narrow hallway that smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair. The shelter was clean but institutional, with fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows and painted concrete walls decorated with inspirational posters that felt more like mockery than encouragement. "You are stronger than you think," proclaimed one faded sign above a row of metal folding chairs where women sat staring at nothing with the hollow eyes of the truly defeated. 3 weeks had passed since Kathy walked out of the Patterson mansion, and each day had brought fresh humiliations as she discovered just how thoroughly Russell had isolated her from any means of independence. The bank accounts she thought were jointly held turned out to be solely in his name. The cards he had given her were merely authorized user accounts that he had canceled within hours of her departure. The prenuptial agreement her stepmother had pressured her to sign without legal representation had been deliberately crafted to leave her with nothing in case of divorce. Even her college transcripts had been mysteriously lost when she tried to apply for teaching positions, though she suspected Russell's influence extended into the education system more than she had realized. "This is your bunk," the coordinator said, indicating a narrow cot squeezed between 2 others in a room that housed 12 women. "Keep your belongings locked up or they'll disappear. Some of these ladies haven't had much practice respecting other people's property." The woman in the next bunk looked up from the paperback romance novel she was reading, her eyes taking in Kathy's expensive but rumpled designer dress with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. "First time in a place like this?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of street wisdom that came from hard experience. "Yes," Kathy whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of her assigned cot. The mattress was thin and lumpy, and she could feel the metal frame through the inadequate padding. "You'll learn," the woman said with dark humor. "Rich husband throw you out." Kathy nodded, unable to trust her voice. The woman, who introduced herself as Carmen, had been living in the shelter for 4 months after her husband's gambling addiction cost them their home. She had 3 children in foster care and worked 2 minimum-wage jobs while trying to save enough money for an apartment deposit. "They all think they own us," Carmen continued, her voice hardening with familiar anger. think they can use us up and throw us away when we stop being useful. But we survive, honey. We survive because we have to. That night, lying on the uncomfortable cot, surrounded by the sounds of 12 women trying to find peace in sleep, Kathy felt the first wave of nausea that she initially attributed to stress and the unfamiliar cafeteria food. But as the days passed and the morning sickness became more pronounced, a terrifying possibility began to form in her mind. She had been so focused on surviving Russell's emotional abuse that she hadn't paid attention to the subtle changes in her body. The exhaustion she had blamed on stress, the sensitivity to certain smells, the way her clothes had been feeling slightly tighter. All symptoms she had ignored in the chaos of her marriage's collapse. When she finally worked up the courage to buy a pregnancy test from the corner pharmacy, with the few dollars she had earned helping other shelter residents fill out job applications, the 2 pink lines appeared immediately, confirming her worst fears. She was pregnant, alone, homeless, and completely dependent on a system designed for temporary crisis management rather than long-term support. The public health clinic where she went for confirmation was another study in institutional efficiency over compassion. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she sat in a waiting room filled with other women whose circumstances ranged from teenage pregnancy to elderly women seeking basic health care they couldn't afford elsewhere. "Mrs. Patterson." The nurse's voice carried a slight note of confusion as she read the name from Kathy's identification. "The doctor will see you now." Dr. Odelsa Morel was a young woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who seemed genuinely concerned about Kathy's welfare. As she confirmed the pregnancy and began discussing prenatal care options, Kathy found herself breaking down completely, sobbing with a desperation that surprised even her. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Kathy whispered through her tears. "I have no money, no home, no family to help me. The baby's father, he's not a good man. He won't want anything to do with this child." Dr. Odelsa Morel handed her a box of tissues and sat quietly while Kathy composed herself. "There are resources available," she said gently. "Programs for pregnant women, assistance with housing and medical care. You don't have to face this alone." "I need to know how far along I am," Kathy said, wiping her eyes. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with." The ultrasound appointment was scheduled for the following week at Charleston General Hospital. Kathy took the bus across town, her stomach churning with anxiety as she tried to prepare herself for whatever she might discover. The radiology department was busy with patients coming and going, and she felt invisible among the crowds of people dealing with their own medical concerns. "Mrs. Patterson," the ultrasound technician called, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense manner who had clearly performed thousands of these procedures. "Let's take a look and see what we're working with." The gel was cold against Kathy's skin as the technician moved the transducer across her abdomen, studying the images that appeared on the monitor with professional concentration. Suddenly, her expression changed, and she leaned forward with renewed interest. "Well, this is interesting," the technician murmured, adjusting the equipment to get a better view. "Congratulations, Mrs. Patterson. You're having twins." The words hit Kathy like a physical blow. Twins, 2 babies, double the responsibility, double the expense, double the challenge of raising children as a single mother with no resources. She stared at the monitor where 2 tiny forms were visible, their hearts beating in steady rhythms that seemed impossibly fast. "Are they—" she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice her questions. "Both appear healthy and developing normally," the technician said kindly, recognizing the fear in Kathy's voice. "You're about 12 weeks along, which puts your due date in early spring, and from what I can see, they're both girls. Twin daughters." As she lay on the examination table staring at the images of her unborn children, Kathy felt a complex mixture of terror and wonder. These babies were innocent victims of Russell's cruelty, conceived during one of his rare moments of physical attention that had been more about dominance than love. But they were also hers, part of her, deserving of a life free from the poison that had infected her marriage. As she left the radiology department, clutching the ultrasound photos in her trembling hands, Kathy felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of her situation. Twin daughters. The words echoed in her mind as she walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit. Later that evening, while researching prenatal care options on the shelter's shared computer, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. A gossip blog post from 3 weeks ago showed Russell at a charity event, laughing with Evangeline Thorne and boasting to reporters, "I'm finally free to marry someone who can actually contribute to the family legacy. My ex-wife would have wanted sons anyway. Daughters are just expensive disappointments that drain resources from real family building." The casual cruelty of his words, the dismissive way he spoke about the children he didn't even know existed, crystallized something hard and determined in Kathy's chest. These babies would never know their biological father's rejection. They would never be made to feel like burdens or disappointments. She would make sure of that, even if it meant fighting the entire world to protect them. But as she walked back to the bus stop, the reality of her situation crashed over her like a cold wave. 2 babies, no money, no home, no support system. The shelter would only let her stay for another month, and after that, she would be truly homeless with 2 newborns to protect. That evening, as she sat in the shelter's common area trying to process the day's revelations, a volunteer approached her. "Mrs. Patterson, there's someone here to see you." Kathy looked up in confusion. "I'm not expecting anyone. He says he used to work for your family, Jonas Fletcher." Kathy's heart stopped. Jonas had somehow found her, but he looked different somehow, more polished, more authoritative, wearing clothes that suggested wealth rather than service. When he spoke, his voice carried the same kindness she remembered from the Patterson mansion, but there was something else now, a confidence that seemed almost familiar. "Mrs. Patterson," he said softly, his gray eyes filled with concern. "My name is John Flanders. I think it's time we had an honest conversation." As Kathy stared at the man who had been her protector in disguise, she realized that her world was about to change again, but this time, perhaps, for the better. The twins kicked gently in her womb as if sensing that their future had just taken an unexpected turn towards something that might actually resemble hope. Chapter 6. The Protector Revealed. "You must think I'm some kind of pathetic fool, believing that a billionaire would actually care about a homeless pregnant woman who can't even figure out how she ended up in this mess." Kathy's voice cracked with exhaustion and disbelief as she stared at the man she had known as Jonas Fletcher, her mind struggling to reconcile the gentle servant with the powerful figure now standing before her in the shelter's dingy common room. John Flanders felt his heart shatter at the pain in her voice, at the way she had learned to expect cruelty, even from kindness. 3 weeks of watching her from a distance as she navigated the shelter system, 3 weeks of fighting every instinct to swoop in and rescue her, had nearly destroyed his self-control. But he had waited because he needed her to see him as her choice, not her savior. "Kathy," he said softly, using her first name for the first time, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch, but also triggered a flash of panic. "May I sit with you? I have so much to explain, and I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you comes from a place of love, not pity." She gestured weakly to the plastic chair beside her, her hands unconsciously moving to protect her still small belly where her daughters were growing. The distinction mattered because Russell had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with children who weren't sons. But even as she tried to process John's revelation, her trauma responses kicked in, the hypervigilance, the constant scanning for danger, the assumption that kindness would eventually be weaponized against her. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why would someone like you—" I'm nobody. I'm broken. I'm carrying another man's children, and I have nothing to offer you except problems and— Stop, John said gently but firmly. Those are Russell's lies speaking, not your truth. Recovery from abuse isn't linear, and I know you might not be able to believe what I'm telling you right now, but I'll wait as long as it takes for you to see yourself the way I see you. I've been John Flanders for 32 years, he began, his voice gentle but steady. I built my company from nothing, made my billions through technology and determination. I could have anything money can buy, go anywhere in the world, meet anyone I want to meet. He paused, his gray eyes never leaving her face. But 6 months ago, I saw you on a hotel balcony, and everything changed. Kathy remembered that night, the Magnolia Foundation dinner where Russell had spent the evening criticizing her dress, her posture, her failure to impress his business associates. She had escaped to the balcony to breathe, to look at the stars and remember that there was a world beyond her cage. You were so beautiful, John continued, his voice thick with emotion. But it wasn't just your beauty that captured me. It was the way you stood there, looking up at the stars with such longing, such hope despite everything you were enduring. I knew in that moment that I was looking at the woman I wanted to spend my life with. That's impossible, Kathy whispered, shaking her head. You don't know me. You don't know what I am, what I've done, how I've failed. You haven't failed, John interrupted firmly, leaning forward to capture her hands in his. You survived. You endured 3 years of systematic abuse from a man who should have cherished you, and you never lost the essential goodness that makes you who you are. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she tried to pull her hands away, but his grip was gentle and insistent. I became Jonas Fletcher because it was the only way I could be close to you, the only way I could protect you without making you feel obligated to me. Love makes us do impossible things, Kathy. I gave up my entire life, my identity, my comfort, because serving you as a butler was more meaningful than ruling an empire without you. The magnitude of his sacrifice hit her like a physical blow. This man, this brilliant, powerful man, had willingly become a servant for her, not because he wanted to possess her or control her, but because he wanted to ease her pain. The roses, she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. The tea, the books, the way you always appeared when Russell was at his worst. I've been in love with you from the moment I first saw you, John said, his voice breaking with the weight of months of hidden feelings. I would give up everything I own just to see you smile genuinely once. I would spend the rest of my life working as your servant if it meant you were safe and happy. But I'm pregnant, she said desperately, as if this would somehow change his feelings. With twins, girls, Russell's children, even though he doesn't want them. John's reaction was immediate and fierce. He slid from his chair to kneel beside her, taking her face gently in his hands while tears streamed down his own cheeks. Those babies are pieces of your heart, he said with passionate intensity. I already love them because they're part of you. They're not Russell's children. They're yours. And if you'll let me, I want to love them and protect them and raise them as if they were gifts given directly to me by God. The promise in his voice, the absolute certainty of his commitment, overwhelmed her completely. Kathy sobbed against his shoulder as years of loneliness and fear finally found release in the arms of someone who truly saw her worth. I have a proposal, John said when her tears finally subsided. Come home with me. Not as my employee, not out of obligation, but as the woman I love and want to build a life with. I have a cottage on my estate that I've been preparing for months, filled with your favorite flowers, painted in colors that make you happy, with a nursery designed like a fairy tale. John, I can't. This is too much. I don't deserve. You deserve everything beautiful this world has to offer, he interrupted firmly. You deserve to be loved without conditions, protected without control, cherished without payment. Let me give you a safe place to heal, to prepare for your daughters, to remember who you were before Russell tried to destroy your spirit." 3 days later, Kathy found herself standing in the doorway of the most beautiful cottage she had ever seen. John's estate sprawled across hundreds of acres of rolling hills and ancient oak trees, but the cottage felt intimate and welcoming rather than overwhelming. The walls were painted in soft lavender and cream, colors that somehow made her feel immediately peaceful. Fresh white roses filled crystal vases throughout the rooms, and classical music played softly from hidden speakers. But it was the nursery that broke her completely. John had created a wonderland fit for princesses, 2 cribs with hand-carved headboards featuring delicate roses and stars, walls painted with scenes from fairy tales, and a rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. Every detail spoke of love and anticipation for daughters who weren't even born yet. As her pregnancy progressed, John became her devoted protector and caregiver, treating her with a reverence that still took her breath away. The first scene that convinced her his love was real came during her worst bout of morning sickness at 16 weeks. She had been violently ill for 3 days, unable to keep anything down, when she woke to find John sitting beside her bed with dark circles under his eyes. "How long have you been here?" she asked weakly. "Since you got sick," he admitted, reaching out to brush her hair back from her sweaty forehead. "I've been holding your hair, bringing you ice chips, monitoring your temperature. I called Dr. Odelsa Morel. She's coming this afternoon to check on you." When another wave of nausea hit, John helped her to the bathroom, holding her hair with one hand while rubbing gentle circles on her back with the other. As she sobbed with exhaustion and embarrassment, he whispered, "You're carrying miracles inside you, my love. You've never been more beautiful to me than you are right now." The second scene came at 24 weeks, when pregnancy insomnia and the baby's constant movement made sleep impossible. Kathy had been lying awake for hours, tears of frustration streaming down her face, when John appeared in her doorway. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head, placing her hands on her growing belly where the twins were engaged in what felt like an elaborate dance routine. "They won't stop moving. Every time I get comfortable, they start kicking again." Without hesitation, John settled into the chair beside her bed and opened a book of poetry. For the next 4 hours, he read to her in his deep, soothing voice. Maya Angelou, Emily Dickinson, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, while massaging her swollen feet and singing gentle lullabies that seemed to calm the babies through her belly. She finally fell asleep to the sound of his voice, promising her daughters that they were already so loved. The third scene, the one that convinced her beyond all doubt that this man's love was real and permanent, came at 32 weeks when the weight of her situation finally crushed her spirit. She had been reading online forums about single motherhood, calculating the costs of raising twins, when panic overwhelmed her completely. "Nobody wants me or these babies," she sobbed when John found her collapsed on the nursery floor. "Russell was right. I'm worthless. I can't even take care of myself. How am I supposed to take care of 2 children? They'd be better off without me." John immediately dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms with infinite tenderness. Through his own tears, he said, "I want you more than my next breath, Kathy. These babies are pieces of your heart, and I already love them fiercely because they're part of you. You 3 are my whole world, my purpose, my everything. I will spend the rest of my life proving that you are wanted, treasured, and absolutely essential to my happiness." That night, as he helped her into bed and kissed her forehead with the reverence of a man worshipping at an altar, Kathy finally began to believe that love, real, sacrificial, transformative love, might actually exist. The twins kicked gently against her ribs, as if they could sense their mother's growing peace and the presence of the man who had already chosen to be their father. Chapter 7. Daughters of Heaven. Even God is punishing me now, sending this storm to make sure I suffer as much as possible during labor. Kathy gasped between contractions as thunder crashed overhead and lightning illuminated the cottage windows like nature's own fireworks display, the March storm seeming to mirror the intensity of the life-changing events unfolding within the safety of John's estate. The contractions had started at dawn, subtle at first like gentle waves, but by afternoon they had transformed into crushing forces that stole her breath and made her grip John's hand with desperate strength. Dr. Odelsa Morel had arrived an hour ago with a full medical team, transforming the cottage's master bedroom into a temporary delivery room with all the equipment necessary to ensure the twins' safe arrival. "The storm will pass, my love," John whispered against her ear, his voice steady despite the fear she could see in his gray eyes. "Just like this pain will pass, and then we'll meet our daughters." He had been saying "our daughters" for weeks now, never once referring to them as anything other than his own, and each time the words fell from his lips, Kathy felt her heart expand with gratitude and wonder. Another contraction seized her, and she cried out despite her determination to be strong. John immediately positioned himself behind her, letting her lean back against his chest while he supported her weight and whispered encouragements that somehow penetrated the haze of pain. His hands were gentle on her shoulders, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of labor. "I can't do this," she sobbed as the pain peaked, her body trembling with exhaustion. "It hurts too much, and I'm scared something will go wrong. What if they're not healthy? What if I'm not strong enough?" "Look at me," John commanded gently, turning her face toward his with tender fingers. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known. You survived 3 years of Russell's cruelty and still managed to keep your beautiful spirit intact. You carried these babies through homelessness and fear and never stopped fighting for them. You can do anything, Kathy, and I will be right here beside you through every moment." Dr. Odelsa Morel looked up from her position at the foot of the bed, her expression calm but focused. "You're doing beautifully, Kathy. The first baby is crowning. Just a few more pushes, and we'll meet your first daughter." The next hour passed in a blur of intensity and wonder. John never left her side, holding her hand when she needed strength, supporting her back when she needed rest, wiping her tears when the pain seemed unbearable. His love was a constant presence, wrapping around her like armor against the fear and uncertainty. "I can see her head," Dr. Odelsa Morel announced with excitement. "One more big push, Kathy." With John's hands supporting her and his voice in her ear, promising that she was almost there, Kathy gathered every ounce of strength she possessed and pushed with everything she had. The sensation of release was immediate and overwhelming, followed by the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the robust cry of a healthy newborn baby. "She's healthy and strong," Dr. Odelsa Morel said with tears in her eyes as she lifted the squirming pink baby into view. "Absolutely stunning." But it was John's reaction that took Kathy's breath away. The man who had built a billion-dollar empire, who commanded respect in boardrooms around the world, who could have anything money could buy, was sobbing openly at the sight of their first daughter. His whole body shook with emotion as he stared at the tiny miracle doctor. Odelsa Morel was cleaning and examining. "She's so extraordinary," he whispered, his voice breaking with wonder. "Look at her little fingers, her delicate nose. Kathy, we made something miraculous." "We?" Kathy asked softly, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had claimed children that weren't biologically his without a moment's hesitation. "We," John confirmed firmly, kissing her temple with reverence. "She's ours, completely and forever." 20 minutes later, the second twin announced her arrival with even more drama than her sister. The storm outside reached its crescendo just as baby number 2 made her entrance into the world, her cries seeming to command the thunder itself to quiet in respect for her royal presence. When Dr. Odelsa Morel announced, "Another perfect daughter," Kathy felt a moment of panic. She remembered Russell's casual dismissal of daughters, his clear preference for sons who could carry on his legacy. What if John, despite all his promises, felt disappointed that neither baby was a boy? But when she looked at John's face, her fears evaporated like morning mist. He was staring at their second daughter with the same awe and adoration he had shown the first, tears streaming freely down his cheeks as he reached out with trembling hands. "May I?" he asked Dr. Odelsa Morel, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course," she replied, carefully placing the cleaned and swaddled baby in his arms. John's reaction overwhelmed everyone in the room. With both tiny daughters now in his arms, one nestled in each elbow, he looked at Kathy with such profound love and gratitude that she began crying all over again. "Don't worry about anything, my darling," he said, his voice shaking with the intensity of his feelings. "A woman has given me the greatest gift imaginable, your daughters. I love these precious little girls more than you could ever know, because daughters are gifts straight from God." He kissed both babies' foreheads with infinite tenderness, his tears falling onto their soft blankets. "You are perfect angels," he whispered to them, "and you will know you are loved and cherished every single day of your lives. Daddy's here, and he will protect you always." Then, looking back at Kathy with eyes that held the depth of oceans, he added, "You just gave me a family. You 3 are my everything, my purpose, my home. I have never been happier than I am in this moment." "Really?" Kathy asked, needing to hear the confirmation. "You're not disappointed they're not boys? You don't wish—" "Kathy," John interrupted, his voice fierce with certainty, "these daughters are exactly what I hoped for, exactly what I prayed for. Do you know what daughters bring to the world? Compassion, intelligence, strength, beauty. They will change everything they touch, make everything better just by existing. Any man who doesn't see the gift of daughters is a fool who doesn't deserve the blessing." As if to emphasize his point, both babies opened their eyes simultaneously, dark eyes that would eventually lighten to match their mother's warm brown, and seemed to study the face of the man who was promising them unconditional love. "What will we name them?" John asked softly, unable to look away from the tiny faces that had already claimed his heart completely. Kathy had been thinking about names for weeks, choosing carefully because she wanted her daughters to have names that reflected hope and beauty rather than the darkness she had escaped. "Aria Noel," she said, looking at their firstborn, "for the music that brought me peace during my darkest days, and for the Christmas hope of new beginnings." "It's perfect," John agreed, his finger gently tracing Aria's tiny cheek. "And Luna Celeste," Kathy continued, smiling at their second daughter, "for the moon that watched over me when I felt most alone, and for the celestial beauty that reminded me there was still wonder in the world." "Aria Noel and Luna Celeste," John repeated reverently. "Our daughters. My daughters." He looked at Kathy with determination that bordered on fierce. "I want to begin legal proceedings immediately to become their father officially. I want them to have my name, my protection, my inheritance. Everything I have will be theirs." Dr. Odelsa Morel cleared her throat gently, reminding them of her presence. "I've delivered hundreds of babies," she said with tears in her eyes, "but I've never seen anything more beautiful than what just happened in this room. Those little girls are incredibly lucky to have parents who love them so completely." As the storm outside finally began to calm, John settled into the rocking chair beside Kathy's bed, with both daughters still in his arms. The sight of this powerful man cradling 2 tiny babies with such tender care, singing softly to them while they slept, filled Kathy with a peace she hadn't known was possible. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he had given her. "Thank you," John replied, his eyes never leaving the faces of their sleeping daughters. "For trusting me with your heart, for sharing these miracles with me, for making me a father. I will spend every day of my life proving worthy of this gift." Outside, the storm clouds were breaking apart to reveal the first stars of evening, as if heaven itself was celebrating the arrival of Aria Noel and Luna Celeste Flanders. Two little girls who would grow up knowing they were wanted, treasured, and loved beyond measure by the man who had chosen to be their father from the very first moment he held them in his arms. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Begins. Those children are my ticket back to relevance, and I'll be damned if I let some tech billionaire raise my daughters when they could be worth millions in child support and inheritance claims. Russell Patterson snarled into his cheap flip phone, his voice echoing off the walls of the studio apartment that had become his prison since losing everything to federal investigators and John Flanders' calculated destruction of his remaining prospects. Russell's obsession with the twins had nothing to do with fatherly love and everything to do with financial desperation and wounded pride. His lawyer had explained that biological children of billionaire John Flanders, even stepchildren, would be entitled to substantial inheritance rights. More importantly, a high-profile custody battle would generate media attention that Russell could leverage into book deals, interview payments, and the kind of notoriety that desperate men could monetize. But deeper than greed was Russell's pathological need to win against John Flanders. The man who had exposed his crimes, destroyed his family's reputation, and stolen his wife had become the target of Russell's obsessive hatred. If he couldn't reclaim his fortune or status, he could at least hurt the man who had everything Russell had lost. 2 years had transformed Russell from Charleston's golden boy into a broken man scrambling for survival in the ruins of his former empire. The federal fraud conviction had cost him 18 months in minimum security prison, followed by 5 years of probation and a lifetime ban from working in the financial sector. His mother, Octavia, had disowned him publicly to save what remained of the family reputation, while his brother Darius had fled to Europe after his own involvement in the money laundering scheme came to light. But Russell's greatest torment came from watching Kathy's transformation through social media posts and society page photographs. The broken woman he had discarded was now radiant and confident, appearing at charity galas and foundation events as John Flanders' partner, her intelligence and grace finally given the platform they deserved. She ran 3 successful charitable organizations, spoke at conferences about domestic violence recovery, and had become one of Charleston's most respected philanthropists. The sight of her happiness, the knowledge that she had not only survived his cruelty but thrived beyond his wildest imagination, filled Russell with a rage that consumed him day and night. He had expected her to come crawling back within months, desperate and broken, ready to accept any scraps of affection he might offer. Instead, she had found someone who valued her worth and built a life that made his former existence look pathetic by comparison. "Mr. Patterson," his court-appointed lawyer said with barely concealed distaste, "pursuing custody of children you've never met is an expensive proposition, and frankly, your chances of success are minimal given your criminal record and complete absence from their lives." "I don't care about the odds," Russell snapped, pacing the cramped space between his fold-out couch and kitchenette. "Those are my biological daughters, which gives me rights. And John Flanders has enough money to make fighting me worth my while. He'll pay whatever it takes to avoid a custody battle, especially once I start talking to the media about how he stole my wife and children." The truth was far different from Russell's delusional narrative. Through careful investigation, he had discovered that Kathy was raising twin daughters, who would be turning 2 years old next month. Daughters born exactly 9 months after he had last touched his wife in a moment of drunken aggression that he barely remembered. The timing was perfect for his purposes, even though he felt nothing but resentment toward children he had never wanted in the first place. Meanwhile, 50 miles away in the sanctuary of John's estate, Kathy was experiencing the kind of happiness she had never believed possible. The woman who had once walked on eggshells around Russell's volatile moods now laughed freely as she chased two toddlers through the garden John had planted specifically for their enjoyment. Arya and Luna, now walking and beginning to form words, had never known anything but unconditional love and security. "Daddy!" Arya squealed with delight as John emerged from his home office where he had been conducting business calls. At 2 years old, she was already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, while Luna possessed an artistic temperament that found beauty in everything around her. "There are my princesses," John said, sweeping both girls into his arms with the practiced ease of a devoted father. "Have you been helping Mommy with the flower garden?" "Flowers," Luna exclaimed, pointing toward the rose bushes that John had expanded each year, creating a rainbow of colors that bloomed from spring through fall. The garden had become Kathy's sanctuary, a place where she could nurture growing things while healing from years of emotional abuse. "John," Kathy said softly, approaching with a legal document that had arrived that morning via certified mail, "we need to talk." The custody petition was a masterpiece of legal manipulation, filed by Russell's attorney in a jurisdiction known for favoring biological parents, regardless of circumstances. The document painted Russell as a reformed man seeking to establish a relationship with daughters he had only recently learned existed, while subtly implying that John's wealth might not provide the stable family environment that traditional two-parent households offered. "He's claiming he never knew about the twins," Kathy said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "Says I hid the pregnancy from him and denied him the opportunity to be a father. He wants joint custody, child support, and visitation rights." John's reaction was swift and decisive. Within hours, he had assembled a legal team that included the best family law attorneys in the Southeast, private investigators with experience in exposing fraudulent custody claims, and media specialists who understood how to control narrative in high-profile cases. "Russell Patterson made a fundamental error in judgment," John told his lead attorney during their strategy session. "He assumed I would pay him to go away quietly. Instead, I'm going to destroy him so completely that he'll regret ever speaking our daughters' names." The counterattack began immediately and was more devastating than Russell could have imagined. John's investigators uncovered documented evidence of every incident of domestic violence during Kathy's marriage, including hospital records, photographs of injuries, and testimony from household staff who had witnessed Russell's abuse. They also discovered Russell's financial crimes extended far beyond what federal prosecutors had proven, involving offshore accounts and money laundering schemes that had never been fully investigated. But John's response went beyond legal maneuvering. Using his business connections and considerable influence within the tech industry, he ensured that Russell's attempts to rebuild his life met with obstacles. Through discreet communications with his network of business associates, word spread that Russell Patterson was an unreliable partner with a history of fraud. While John's influence accelerated Russell's isolation, much of the damage came from Russell's own actions. His criminal record was public, his business reputation genuinely destroyed by his own choices, and his abrasive personality had burned bridges long before John entered the picture. The investigation into Octavia and Darius Patterson revealed a web of corruption that had been hidden for decades. Octavia's charitable foundation, which she had used to maintain her social standing, was exposed as a front for tax evasion and money laundering. The revelation that Charleston's grand dame of society had been stealing from children's charities sent shockwaves through the elite circles she had dominated for 30 years. Darius's European exile came to an abrupt end when Interpol issued warrants for his arrest on international financial fraud charges. The evidence John's team provided to authorities painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for generations, protected by social status and carefully cultivated political connections. The media coverage was relentless and devastating. Russell's custody petition became the subject of investigative journalism that exposed every detail of his abuse toward Kathy, his criminal conviction, and his current circumstances. The man who had once been featured on society pages was now the subject of true crime documentaries about domestic violence and financial fraud. "Mr. Pattison," his lawyer said during their final meeting, "I strongly advise you to withdraw the custody petition. Mr. Flanders has evidence that could result in additional criminal charges being filed against you. Your chances of gaining any form of custody are zero, and continuing this fight will only bring more scrutiny to activities you probably don't want investigated." Russell's response was to fire his lawyer and attempt to represent himself, a decision that proved to be his final mistake. During the custody hearing, Kathy testified about the systematic abuse she had endured, while John's legal team presented evidence that painted Russell as a dangerous man who had shown no interest in his biological children until he saw an opportunity for financial gain. The judge's ruling was swift and unequivocal. Russell's parental rights were terminated completely, citing his criminal record, history of domestic violence, and clear lack of genuine interest in the children's welfare. The twins would legally become John's daughters through formal adoption, their names changed to Aria Noel Flanders and Luna Celeste Flanders. But for John, the legal victory was secondary to the personal one. As they left the courthouse with their 18-month-old daughters playing happily in their stroller, completely unaware of the threat that had been neutralized, he realized that Russell's greatest punishment wasn't financial ruin or social exile. It was knowing that he had lost the chance to be part of something beautiful, something real, something that money couldn't buy. "It's over," Kathy whispered, finally allowing herself to believe that Russell could never hurt their family again. "No," John replied, watching Aria and Luna chase butterflies in the courthouse garden, while Kathy's face glowed with relief and happiness. "It's just beginning. The best parts of our story are still ahead of us." That evening, as they tucked their daughters into the cribs John had built with his own hands, both parents understood that they had won more than a legal battle. They had won the right to build a family based on love rather than obligation, choice rather than circumstance, and hope rather than fear. Chapter 9. Love Unguarded. Stop lying to yourself about what this is. He doesn't love you. He just pities you. And the moment he gets tired of playing house with a broken woman and her bastard children, he'll discard you just like Russell did, the cruel voice in Kathy's mind whispered as she watched John patiently teaching 3-year-old Aria how to build a sandcastle in their backyard sandbox, his expensive business shirt rolled up to his elbows and his face glowing with genuine joy at their daughter's delighted laughter. 6 months had passed since the custody battle's resolution, and Kathy had spent every day fighting the internal war between her growing love for John and her terror that she was somehow taking advantage of his kindness. Russell's final cruelty lived on in the doubts he had planted in her mind, the insidious belief that she was fundamentally unworthy of real love, that any man who claimed to care for her was either lying or would eventually discover his mistake. But watching John with their daughters was slowly eroding those poisonous thoughts. This was a man who built his empire during nap times so he could be present for every milestone. He had missed board meetings to attend Aria's first steps and canceled international trips when Luna showed signs of teething discomfort. When the 2-year-old twins had nightmares, it was John who appeared in their room with warm milk and gentle songs, his deep voice chasing away monsters real and imagined. "Mommy, look," Aria called out, pointing to the elaborate sandcastle structure that was taking shape under John's patient guidance. "Daddy says it's big enough for princesses." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Kathy replied, her heart clenching with the familiar mixture of wonder and fear that accompanied every moment of happiness in this new life. The twins had never known John as anything other than their father. They had no memory of the shelter, no awareness that he wasn't their biological parent, no understanding that their family had been born from tragedy and transformation. Luna walked over from her position near the flower garden, her small hands filled with the white roses that still appeared mysteriously throughout the estate. At 2 years old, she was developing into an artist like her mother, seeing beauty in shadows and light that others missed. She had John's patience and Kathy's sensitivity, combined with a creativity that manifested in everything from finger paintings to elaborate block constructions. "Daddy, flowers for Castle," Luna announced with the serious concentration of a 2-year-old on a mission, offering her treasure to John with the solemnity of a diplomat presenting state gifts. "Perfect, Luna Bell," John said, using the pet name that never failed to make their youngest daughter giggle. "Every castle needs beautiful flowers. You have excellent artistic sense." As Kathy watched this scene, her daughters playing with the man who had chosen to love them without condition, their laughter mixing with the sound of birds in the ancient oak trees, she felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. The realization hit her like lightning. She wasn't grateful to John Flanders. She was desperately, completely, hopelessly in love with him. The knowledge terrified her more than Russell's worst rages ever had. Love had meant pain and humiliation with Russell, a transaction where her worth was constantly evaluated and found wanting. But what she felt for John was entirely different. A deep, abiding affection that had grown from friendship and respect into something that felt as essential as breathing. It was the difference between being owned and being cherished, between performing for approval and being accepted completely. Even now, 18 months after Russell's final cruelty, she still had flashbacks during thunderstorms, still felt panic when voices were raised, still caught herself apologizing for things that weren't her fault. But John had never once shown impatience with her healing process, never made her feel weak for needing time to trust again. His love was patient and steady, creating space for her to recover at her own pace. She loved the way he made coffee in the morning, humming softly while he prepared breakfast for their family. She loved how he listened when she talked about her dreams for expanding their charitable work, his questions thoughtful and encouraging rather than dismissive. She loved watching him read bedtime stories with different voices for every character, his dramatic interpretations making Arya and Luna collapse with giggles. Most of all, she loved the man he was when no one was watching, patient with telemarketers, kind to delivery drivers, generous with employees who made mistakes. His goodness wasn't performed for her benefit. It was simply who he was, as natural as his breathing. That evening, after the twins had been bathed and tucked into their beds, with the elaborate bedtime ritual that included story time, lullabies, and individual conversations about their day, Kathy found herself standing in the doorway of the nursery, watching John arrange Luna's stuffed animals in precisely the order she preferred. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "You've had a long day with the board meeting, the conference calls." "There's nothing I'd rather be doing," John replied, his voice carrying the sincerity that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "This is the best part of my day. Being here with you and the girls, this is when I feel most like myself." He straightened Luna's favorite blanket, a soft pink throw that had been a gift from Dr. Odelsa Morel, and checked that the nightlight was positioned to cast comforting shadows rather than scary ones. Every movement spoke of practiced love, of a man who had learned his daughter's needs and preferences through devoted attention rather than obligation. "John," Kathy said, stepping into the room, "can we talk?" Something in her tone made him look up sharply, his gray eyes immediately searching her face for signs of distress. "Of course. Is everything all right? Did something happen today?" They moved to the garden swing he had built for her during her pregnancy, a two-person bench suspended from the strongest oak tree on the property and positioned to catch both sunrise and sunset. The May evening was perfect, warm but not humid, filled with the scent of jasmine and the sound of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. "I need to tell you something," Kathy began, her hands twisting in her lap as she struggled to find words for feelings that seemed too big for language. "I've been thinking about us, about what this is, about what I feel." John went very still beside her, and she could sense him holding his breath. "Kathy, if you're feeling pressured in any way, if you need space or time—" "No," she interrupted, finally finding the courage to look directly into his eyes. "That's not what I mean. John, I love you. Not because you saved me, not because you've given me and the girls a home, not out of gratitude or obligation. I love you because you showed me what my heart was created for." The words hung between them like a bridge she had finally found the courage to cross. John's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, wonder, hope, and finally a joy so profound it took her breath away. "Kathy," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been desperately in love with you since the first moment I saw you, but I was terrified you'd feel obligated to love me back. I wanted to earn your heart, not buy it with security or comfort." "You did earn it," she said firmly, reaching for his hands. "Every day, with every kindness, every moment of patience with the girls, every time you've treated me like someone worth cherishing rather than someone worth fixing. You earned my love by being the man you are when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain except the satisfaction of doing right." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what had just been spoken aloud. Then John slipped from the swing to kneel on one knee in front of her, and Kathy's heart began racing with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "I've been carrying something for months," he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. "Not an expensive diamond meant to impress, but something I hoped would mean more." When he opened the box, Kathy gasped. Inside was her grandmother's ring, the simple gold band with a modest pearl that Grandmother Lily had worn for 60 years of marriage. The ring Cordelia had sold, along with everything else, when she liquidated the estate. "How did you—" Kathy began, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "I tracked it down through auction records and private collectors," John said, his own voice thick with emotion. "It took 8 months and more money than the ring is worth monetarily, but I knew what it would mean to you. Your grandmother's love story, her belief in lasting commitment. I wanted that to be part of our beginning." He took her left hand gently in his thumb tracing over her knuckles with reverence. "Kathy Lily, will you let me love you and our daughters for the rest of my life? Will you marry me not because I can provide for you, but because you believe we can build something extraordinary together? Because you trust me with your heart the same way I've trusted you with mine?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, with the conviction of a woman finally free to choose her own destiny. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." As John slipped the pearl ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as if her grandmother's blessing was reaching across time to sanctify this moment. Kathy felt the last chains of her past finally fall away. She was no longer Russell's victim or even John's rescued charity case. She was simply a woman choosing to love and be loved, building a future based on hope rather than fear. They kissed then, their first real kiss, as an engaged couple, surrounded by the garden John had planted for her, and serenaded by the sound of their daughter's peaceful breathing, drifting through open windows. Above them the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and soft snow began to fall like a blessing from heaven itself. "I love you," Kathy whispered against his lips, the words coming easier now that she had given herself permission to feel them fully. "I love you too," John replied, holding her close as if she were the most precious thing in his world. which, she finally understood, she truly was. Forever and always, my heart. Forever and always. Chapter 10. Forever begins now. Even on what should be the happiest day of her pathetic life, she'll never escape the truth that she's nothing but damaged goods that nobody really wanted until a billionaire needed a charity project, Russell muttered bitterly as he watched news coverage of the wedding on the television in his one-room apartment. The society pages he had once graced now featuring the woman he had discarded and the man who had destroyed him. The irony wasn't lost on him that John Flanders owned half the commercial properties in Charleston County, including the construction company where Russell had finally found work, cleaning porta-potties and hauling debris. His criminal record and bankruptcy had limited his employment options to the most menial labor, and in a city dominated by old money families who remembered his disgrace, even those opportunities were scarce. From his position emptying trash cans, he could see the elaborate preparations for what Charleston society was calling the wedding of the decade. White silk pavilions had been erected throughout John's gardens, their elegant curves complementing the natural beauty of the rose gardens that had grown more spectacular each year. Thousands of white flowers created a fairyland setting, while string quartet musicians rehearsed beneath ancient oak trees that had witnessed centuries of human joy and sorrow. Everything was perfect, beautiful, and completely beyond Russell's reach or understanding. Inside the estate's main house, Kathy stood before a full-length mirror in the bridal suite John had specially prepared for this day. The woman looking back at her was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with the exquisite lace gown or the professional styling. At 29, she had finally grown into the confidence and grace that Russell had spent 3 years trying to destroy. "You look like a queen, Mommy," Arya said solemnly from her position on the velvet chaise, where she was carefully holding her flower girl bouquet. At 4 years old, she possessed a vocabulary that impressed adults, and a protective instinct toward her mother that sometimes made Kathy's heart ache with love. "Queen Mommy," Luna agreed enthusiastically, spinning in her matching flower girl dress until the silk skirt flared out around her like a miniature ball gown. Luna's artistic temperament had only grown stronger with age, and she saw magic in everything from butterfly wings to the way sunlight caught in crystal glasses. Dr. Odelsa Morel, who had become not just Kathy's physician but one of her closest friends, finished adjusting the train of the wedding dress with the precision of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. "I've never seen a more beautiful bride," she said with tears in her eyes, "and I've never seen two people more meant for each other." The wedding ceremony took place at sunset, with 300 guests witnessing the union of two people who had found love in the aftermath of trauma and built something extraordinary from the ashes of destroyed dreams. John stood at the altar in a custom-tailored tuxedo that emphasized his tall, strong frame, but it was the expression on his face as he watched Kathy walk down the aisle that took everyone's breath away. He looked at her as if she were a miracle he couldn't quite believe was real, as if he were the luckiest man who had ever lived, as if seeing her in that moment was worth every difficulty he had ever endured. The love shining in his gray eyes was so profound that several guests began crying before the ceremony even began. Arya and Luna, now steady on their feet at 2.5 years old, served as flower girls in matching white dresses with tiny embroidered hearts that John had personally designed. When they reached the altar, both girls took their places beside their parents with the confidence of children who had never doubted their place in the world. John's vows brought the entire assembly to tears. "Kathy, you taught me that love isn't about what I can give you, but about becoming the man worthy of your heart. You took a broken billionaire who thought success meant accumulating wealth and showed him that true richness comes from sharing your life with someone who sees your soul. You are my miracle, my purpose, my home. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but in the difficult ones. I promise to see you not as you were, but as you are becoming. I promise to build a life with you where our daughters know they are cherished, not for what they achieve, but for who they are. Kathy's response was equally powerful. John, you saved me not by rescuing me from my circumstances, but by showing me who I could become when someone believed in my worth. You loved me when I couldn't love myself, protected me when I couldn't protect myself, and gave me the space to heal and grow into the woman I was meant to be. You are my partner, my protector, my greatest love. I promise to build dreams with you, to face challenges beside you, and to love you with all the strength of a heart that finally understands what it was created for. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, John's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise sealed in front of witnesses who understood they were seeing something rare and precious. Arya and Luna clapped enthusiastically, their laughter mixing with the sound of champagne corks popping, and congratulations flowing from friends who had watched this love story unfold over years of patience and devotion. The reception continued late into the evening, with dancing under the stars and toasts that celebrated not just the marriage but the family that had been forged through choice rather than circumstance. John's first dance with his new wife was followed by father-daughter dances with Arya and Luna, both girls standing on his feet, while he waltzed them around the dance floor with the solemnity of a man honoring princesses. The years that followed their wedding became a testament to the healing power of unconditional love. 5 years later, the Flanders family had become legendary in Charleston for their devotion to each other and their community impact. Her transformation from victim to advocate had inspired thousands of women to believe that escape and healing were possible. But it was in the quiet moments of daily life that their love story truly shone. Every morning, John still left handwritten notes for Kathy expressing his love and gratitude for another day together. He had never missed a school performance, ballet recital, or parent-teacher conference, running his billion-dollar empire around the schedule of 2 little girls who called him Daddy and meant it with every fiber of their beings. Arya, now 7.5 years old, was developing into a natural leader with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. She excelled in school, showed remarkable empathy for children who were struggling, and had already announced her intention to become a lawyer who helps people like Mommy used to need help. Luna, equally brilliant but artistically inclined, filled their home with paintings, sculptures, and elaborate stories that revealed a creativity inherited from generations of women who had found beauty in difficult circumstances. She had John's patience and Kathy's sensitivity, combined with an ability to see magic in the ordinary world that reminded adults to look more carefully at the wonders around them. On a crisp October evening, as autumn painted the estate's trees in shades of gold and crimson, the family gathered on their porch swing for the daily ritual that had become sacred to all of them. John sat with Kathy curled against his side, while Arya and Luna snuggled against their parents, everyone watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Tell us the story, Daddy," Luna requested, her voice carrying the drowsy contentment of a child who had never known fear or uncertainty. "Which story, Luna Bell?" John asked, though he already knew the answer. "The story about how you and Mommy found each other," Arya said seriously. "The one about true love that's stronger than everything bad." As John began the familiar tale, carefully edited for young ears, but true in all the ways that mattered, Kathy spotted a figure in the distance. Russell Patterson was walking slowly along the public road that bordered their property, his shoulders bent with the weight of choices that had cost him everything meaningful. He had become a cautionary tale in Charleston circles, a reminder that cruelty and selfishness ultimately destroyed the person who practiced them. But Kathy felt no anger as she watched him disappear into the gathering darkness. Russell's greatest punishment wasn't poverty or social exile. It was knowing that he had lost the chance to be part of something beautiful, something real, something that money couldn't buy and power couldn't control. And they lived happily ever after, John concluded, kissing the top of Luna's head while Arya nestled deeper into her mother's embrace. Really happily ever after? Arya asked, needing the reassurance that some stories truly did have perfect endings.